do a two-parter on this.
There we are. Yay. Hey, well, welcome everyone. We are so excited and happy post Thanksgiving. I don't know if you guys are a little tired, but I am this morning. And I think H is probably, he just
H is more tired.
came off of a red eye and was so kind to be available today. And Micah, you're in Salt Lake City, so
Yep,
still enjoying family and friends. So
absolutely.
we are just excited to be here today. And really, we're going to be talking the next few weeks and into January, possibly February, about leadership and just the importance right now of leadership in this changing environment. And we keep talking about the Great Resignation and all the things going on in the workforce. But right now, as leaders are challenged to attract, develop, and retain employees, they must rethink how they're shaping and building a culture. And so today we want to talk about, well, what does a purpose-driven culture look like and why do we need one? And what we know is that employees are wanting to be a part of meaningful work now. And so how do you, even in this fast-paced change, and we'll get into this. I think a lot of us know people who are moving from different companies, who are changing, who are starting their own businesses. And then there's companies that are losing people and they're trying to maintain their culture while they're attracting, retaining, and developing people. So it's just a big challenge right now. The big thing with culture that we want to talk about is, I think the controlling idea I see is that you're only as good as the stakeholders believe you are. So as a culture behaves, you, no matter what you tell the world, your employees' behavior will speak louder. So it's up to the leader, it's up to the manager every day to maintain that culture. So the question is, how purpose-driven is your culture? We know in a recent LinkedIn survey that people would rather put up with low pay, 65%, and forego a fancy title, 26%, than deal with a bad workforce environment. So nearly half of employees, 45%, say leadership is minimally or not at all committed to improving their culture. And I know it's probably frustrating right now as a leader. You've got a lot on your plate and you're overwhelmed. So I can only imagine, how do you take time to develop a culture? But what we're hearing from employees is, and this is from Gallup, that only 27% of employees strongly agree that their organization always delivers on the promises it makes its customers. And less than half of B2B customers, 46%, strongly believe that companies that do business with always deliver on their promises. So only 4 in 10 employees strongly agree that their mission or purpose of their organization makes them feel like their job is important. So there's a huge need now. We know people want to be a part of meaningful work, and they want to make sure that their leader is recognizing their work and that they are a part of something bigger than themselves. So I think when we don't build a culture, it's going to lead to just repercussions that we can't even imagine. The cost of voluntary turnover is, I think it's 2 times an employee's annual salary just to do each one. So
Yep.
I mean, it's crazy. So I'd love to kind of get us going with some points about, if you're a leader right now, what is something you can be doing to help develop a purpose-driven culture? And one of the first things I'd like for us to discuss is revisit your purpose and make sure that it meets the humanness need in today's workforce. And I'd love to see and hear from Micah and H what your thoughts are on that as you think about, as a leader, how do you make sure that you are instilling that purpose and that it meets that human need?
I can start and then pass it on to
Yeah.
H. One of the things that I feel like is very much a part of purpose. For one, I think taking the time to actually define and articulate your purpose. That is, I think, a no-brainer. That's a given. It needs to be well defined and communicated to your employees. I've worked with organizations that employees don't know the purpose statement. They couldn't tell you what the defined purpose is. And so leadership went through that process, but they didn't communicate it down every area of the organization, and employees don't actually know it. So it doesn't serve its purpose if people aren't familiar with it. So communicating it regularly can be one way to do that. But one thing that I like, that I think is a factor of purpose that I like to see in organizations I work with, is when they've also defined their values. Values and purpose, I think, go hand in hand. When you can describe what's important to us as an organization, when you value certain values, when you have certain values, it's a way to help attract the right people to your organization when they can read your purpose and values, and they can start to determine that job fit and whether they're an organizational cultural fit with your company or with your team, because they can evaluate themselves, I do or do not align with your values as a company, and they can self-select in or out. And it kind of creates this nice, not barrier, filter, I think, for organizational and cultural fit, for attracting the right people and retaining the right people, because the culture fit is kind of self-selected in some ways.
I love that. And I think values transcend everything, right? So when you're going through, whether it's a pandemic, the values don't change. I mean, they're there and they come through in great ways. So I'm glad you brought that up. What are your thoughts, Age?
I agree with that. In terms of, because what we're talking about is organizational development. And just to give context, when we say organizations and we're using, the organization isn't an overall company, a large company. It can be your group, your function. It can be your team. It can be you and two other people. That's your project team. You have a culture, and we're advocating that when you define the purpose of that, whether it's at the organizational level or at the team level, that's the real starting place. I find too often, and I've got clients I'm working with now, that especially faced with uncertain times or uncertainty, and the uncertainty is not just the pandemic and the Great Resignation, but what's going to be the future of work. And so they start with, too often I find that leaders start with a reorg. It's hard. And the question I think employees will have is, what's the reorg grounded in? And it's got to be grounded in purpose, right? I think one of the key things I've learned in the last 2 years, and I got this from a Harvard article, is it used to be purpose was what you did for your stakeholders. And now what I advocate is purpose is what you do with your customers and your stakeholders. They want to be part of that. If they don't feel part of that, then it's, I think then you're missing a huge opportunity. And I think that starting with that purpose, and to your point, the values, and I agree with you on values. I think the problem becomes values become stuff you put on a poster and a t-shirt.
Yeah,
and they don't mean anything. And so to me, it's values have to be linked to behaviors. One, so that leaders can model it. And two, so that employees know what the expectations are. And Micah, you said this, I think, having interviewed people and interviewing for years in corporate, I think one of the hardest things to figure out is cultural fit, right? How do you ascertain that in an interview? So the last thing I'll say about values is, and I've done this exercise and I think it's really worthwhile, is to look at, here's our particular values. I love when people say our values are open, honest communication. Well, what does that look like? That looks like different things to different people. So I think anchoring that in, take the strength finders and then have the exercise with your team where you say, how does someone high in achiever or someone high in execution in their top 5, let's say, or they're high in execution. How does someone high in execution demonstrate open, honest communication versus someone high in strategic thinking? And have that conversation, right? So people does 2 things. 1, the values come to life, and 2, your employees start to go, this is how I live the value. So a couple things, but I think, to your all's point, organizational development, team development, all that starts with have a purpose, then have your values, define behaviors, roles and responsibilities, and then do structure. And I think we go the opposite.
I love that. That makes me think of, there are almost like 3 stages in the application of purpose and values. First, you ask, do you have them? Second, do you know them? And third, do you live them? Because I've worked with people who are at different stages. Some of them can't even answer the first question. No, we don't even have them. Great, let's start there. Now, if you have them, Do you know them as an organization? Do people actually know what your values and purpose are? And if that's a yes, then it's like, great, do you live them? And that's the connection to behavior. I love that.
I would even back up one more, Mike, and say, is your purpose driving the results that you want? And Dana, to your point, that the perception that you want your customers and shareholders to have about you.
Absolutely. Yeah. I want to take a minute here and remind you guys, if you have a question, please post it in the chat here, and we will write you back, or we won't be able to write you back, but we'll be able to answer it and get back to you. So please, if you have questions as we go through this. And I love this conversation. I think H, you said just as we were signing on that we could go, this could be a two-parter because there's so much. There's so much around this. And I think with leaders and employees both alike have responsibility here. And I think the culture is a definite living, breathing machine. It is live every day. And it's really up to the leader and the employee. And I think when you all were talking about purpose and mission and values, each person should know their own purpose as well as the company's purpose, because that's going to attract them to the kind of company that they want to work with and help charge up their strengths, based on what they get energy from doing. And I did a little poll yesterday on LinkedIn and asked how many people knew their purpose, whether it's for their company or for themselves. And it was a 50-50 so far, that people don't know. They're just, dealing with life and might be a little frustrated, but haven't taken time or don't even know how to develop the purpose.
And Dana, just sorry to interrupt, but I bet if you ask that same poll, it's like, do you know how stuff gets done around here? They probably score really high.
Yeah.
And I think the question is, that's your culture, how stuff gets done around here. Does that align with your purpose and your values? Because if not, I think that's where employees will feel disenfranchised and disengaged.
Yeah. And I think as you're developing your purpose, if you don't have it and you're still developing your culture, making sure that it's not only the boardroom down to the entry level person, everybody has a responsibility and everybody has a need. I think the biggest challenge I see is clarity, giving employees clarity about what the purpose is about, something that they can repeat, something that they understand, something that motivates them. And I think so many times there's a lot of lofty words and there's a lot of communication that needs to happen for them to get it. And we want it to be easy. We want the employees to march to it, the customers to march to it, and everybody to feel like they're all a part of a bigger mission. And I think that's the biggest challenge with purpose, is getting it where people can say it and can march to it, and not letting the board think, oh, it's just their job, or not letting the middle manager think it's somebody else's, but all of them have a responsibility.
Well, I think to that point, right, if you want people to be accountable for it or committed to it, right, you're committed to the degree you have some skin in the game, some ownership. I think purpose can be assigned to you, like if you're on a team and you manage a group. It's like you're not going to impact that. But I think how the purpose comes to light in terms of values and behaviors, that should be a collaborative exercise. And I think that's the big shift you're seeing in the marketplace today and with businesses and even small startups is, it's no command and control leadership that dictates the purpose will not get you far.
Right.
You have to partner with your employee, your shareholders, not just your stakeholders, not just your shareholders. Sorry. And your stakeholders are your customers and your employees. And I think the other thing that flabbergasts me is, I'll be working with senior management and they'll be talking about their purpose and values. And I want to go, you're so far removed from your customers. Your customers are millennials and Gen Z. So why don't you ask the employees who are millennials and Gen Z, under 38 years old or so, what's important to them? What are their what are their values? And I just find that I think it is, and I don't think we've coined the phrase of what the leadership and type and cultures are. I know we're shifting out of command and control, and we've been doing it for years. I don't know what the next one looks like. I think that'll be.
I think that's a good point, though. Like, we keep bringing up this disconnect between, or a potential disconnect between what you say and what you do. That really is a challenge that a lot of leaders experience, as being, it needs to, purpose and values, or that kind of cultural definition, needs to lead to behaviors that are in line with your purpose and values. And that disconnect is a real thing. And I can hear that H has worked with organizations who have experienced this, and I have too. That I've worked for companies that say these are our values, but what's incentivized and rewarded within the company is not in line with the values that are defined. And so making that connection is so important for leaders, and can be really hard if they're too disconnected either from their customers or their employees.
Yeah.
It's interesting too, you said rewarded. So reward programs are pretty popular, but what's happening with employee attendance? People aren't in the office anymore. And so you can't really reward. How do you show that? How do you know what I'm saying? And so there's different things going on right now in this big transformation, that how do you build these reward programs that'll help incentivize and play into the purpose and play into the culture, and that let each employee know each day that they're being recognized. But it's not only leader recognition, it's peer recognition. It's what are the programs, what are the opportunities that somebody gets to work and they feel like they're connected to a bigger purpose, not only because of their leader, but because of their peers and because of their customers, and they start feeling that. And so I think we're going to see a lot of changes in that reward program and how people are rewarding and incentivizing employees as we move forward.
So everything I'm reading, Dana, is I think we got caught up before the pandemic and especially hiring millennials, right? And the Silicon Valley of, you got to have a barista on site, bring your dog. You got to have
play ping pong.
And it was a lot of the perks, and or even the ones that said vacation anytime. Like, we're not saying you can only have 2 weeks or whatever. And I think those are really perk based reward. And what the pandemic has done is a reset that says, people have the opportunity to go, what's important to me? And this is what's fascinating. So there's a book, I quoted this years ago, a guy named DECI, and it's, and if you, what's his name? Daniel Pink. I think I'm going to get this wrong. Pink wrote a book that captures that, called Everybody Sells. I think I'm going to get that wrong, but it's Pink's book. He summarizes DC stuff. And he says, what are the 4 motivations that people are looking for? And they want autonomy, which is why people are wanting flexible work time right now, and to work from home or work wherever they want. They want meaning. And we've been talking about that, right? Where they want purpose. Like, I don't want to work for you just so you're profitable. I want to know you have a purpose. And by the way, that you're living your purpose. And it's more than just, the purpose is aligned with external folks in the community. And that's the third thing they want, is community. I want to work with people that I enjoy working with. And I want to work for a boss that's not a, that guy or that person, right? The a-hole. And
wasn't it mastery? Oh yeah, you're getting there.
Yeah, that's it.
Mastery.
Yeah. Oh my God, this has been around for years, and I feel like every decade or so it just pops up. Like, oh look, we're back to the basics.
Absolutely.
Yeah, those first 3 were in Daniel Pink's book Drive.
Yes.
Did he update it? Oh, okay. I wondered if he did.
No, that's it.
I hadn't heard of Community. I hadn't heard of Community. That's awesome.
Yeah,
I like that fourth edition.
Well, and I think Community's probably more important now than it has been in the past because of the hybrid situation, and because people want to be connected to somebody, and they want, they need accountability, they need help. So I think the other thing that I wanted to talk about as we think about culture and building a culture with purpose is making sure you're unifying that purpose, your brand, and your culture together so that they all have metrics around them. You're not just looking at them isolated. because employees will know exactly what to deliver and they'll feel inspired to deliver it. Not just about the culture, but they'll see, oh my gosh, we've got more customers because of this. And then they're going to be able to deliver high quality every time. But if they can't see the measurement of it, or if they can't see that what they're doing is making a difference, they're not going to even try to think about it. So they've got to see how it ties to the brand. I know when we were developing the new brand at Southwest, we spent a lot of time doing employee listening tour as well as a customer listening tour, and what is important on the brand, and what is and then how do we every time we brought out the new information on the brand, it was always tied into the purpose and the mission. So the connection's always there. And I think that is a big no-no I see a lot of brands do, is they try to separate all that. And I think that's a big piece of building brand culture.
Yeah, and I think there's a really great connection, I think, to the Gallup engagement survey questions, the two Q12 questions. Absolutely. That very first question, do I know what's expected of me at work? That is the most important question to be able to answer for people. And I know that it's hard to measure everything. It's hard to find metrics for certain performance KPIs that you're trying to keep track of. But I would suggest that if you can't measure or define measurements for what's expected of your employees, you don't know what's expected of your employees. And I think that's a really good way to evaluate as a leader. Do my employees know what's expected of them, and can I measure it so that I can communicate back to them whether they're meeting those expectations? Because if employees do know what's expected of them and can be communicated whether they're meeting those expectations, that creates a kind of a baseline psychological safety that I belong here. I know that I'm valued because I know what's expected of me, and I know I'm contributing to those expectations.
I think there's a strong correlation, I never put this together before, between the Q12, Gallup's Q12, and the DC, autonomy, meaning, community, development.
Oh, totally.
Absolutely.
Right? Absolutely.
Yeah, when you look at that.
I think Gallup packages it really well, but this goes back a while. The other thing to build on that, I don't know, I think too often we think measurement, Dana, and I agree it's important. Leaders abdicate that that's the company's job to measure that. And I think you can, if you think about, and again, I'm going back to the ones from Pink and Drive. How do you measure? Because I think autonomy, development, and even meaning to a degree, it's a leader can impact all of those for each employee. So how do you measure? And you can measure that, right? Even in a conversation, I think, it's that time of year for a lot of companies. I've certainly done a couple sessions on performance management, right? And you're doing the year-end conversation. And I think that's a powerful way to end the year and go, tell me about, autonomy. How do you feel in terms of, are you set up for success? And are you, on a day in, day out basis, how is work going for you? And then meaning, asking that, like what will be meaningful for you, and what was meaningful for you in 2021, and what will be meaningful for you in 2022. And then and out of that, like, what are your development? I think that's a very simple way to connect with employees, especially at year end. Wow. Pink's really thank us if people go out and buy Drive if we see a spike.
Yeah, right. You're welcome.
There you go.
I like that point, that this is also, it can't be cookie cutter. You have that conversation with each of your employees, because what brings purpose to one employee might be different from what brings purpose to another. And they have to, like to Dana's point before, they may not understand that themselves unless you have that conversation with them. Then you can meet those needs better and make that connection better.
And I think this is why I'm such a big proponent of know your own personal purpose and what you're created to do. But you got to start with your strengths, right? So if I'm out there as a leader, or if I'm an employee, I'm going to be attracted to companies for certain reasons. And it's probably something deep within my heart calling that I didn't even know I had, that was part of my strengths. right? And but yet I get attracted to that. Well, how cool is that to be able to articulate that as you're discovering your strengths and you're discovering who you are. And then for the companies to have, you know, a purpose that is bigger than everybody there, but everybody feels a part of that. So I think that's why I'm so passionate about that. And strengths is a great tool to use to help you figure that out. So I think that's a big thing. And I think as we're looking at measurements and we're talking about measurements, it's important that the employee sees a simple way that they're making a difference. I've seen very complicated analytics, and people just, you know, if our brain has to work too hard to figure something out, we're just going to turn it off. And what do we call it? The caveman. If we can just grunt and get it, you know, then good, we've got it. And so how do you create that kind of communication plan around this is so important, and making it simple and easy to remember. The other piece of that measurement, though, is the actual leader and them being responsible for driving culture and driving performance and measuring that as well. So just as you were talking about H with employee one-on-ones right now, also with leaders asking themselves as they're talking to their direct report, have I been able to impact the culture this year? How have I done that? What are things I've done to help grow purpose-driven culture? And I think that's a really important conversation right now.
Something you said, Dana, that resonates, and I think I want to kind of encapsulate. I think there's top-down purpose, you know, so it's at an organizational level. And again, organization can be your team, your group, your company. I think there has to be a bottom up, and I think this is where we've talked about this before. We could spend a ton of time on it. I think as leaders, helping your people find their purpose, right? Mm-hmm. Especially now, because just as companies are struggling with, wow, what is our purpose going forward in this new way of working and new world? I think employees are too. So how do you know? And I think you said it. It starts with knowing your strengths. Your strengths should emanate your purpose, your personal brand, your purpose as part of that should emanate from that. And so I think just it's funny as you've talked about, hey, organizations, teams should start with their purpose and then their values and articulate their brand. It also is like, I think you got to start from the bottom up and have employees understand their strengths, build their purpose, and be able to articulate their brand. And you've got to measure on both. You got to measure at the macro level, but you also have to measure at the micro level.
I agree. Yeah.
That's cool.
By the way, we know how to do the strengths and individual purpose work and build your personal brand, which is all part of that. So
yeah, so if any of you are listening today and you need help building your personal, I know there's people out there that have no clue what their purpose is or their strengths, just reach out to one of us. We're here for you. And I think that is a key that a lot of people just maybe if they do get their Clifton strengths, they might just put them in the drawer and not apply them every day. And there's so much energy and confidence and productivity that come from using your strengths every day. And I think that's when you get a highly engaged culture, when you become a strengths-based culture as a company, and actually
a highly engaged employee when you're living your strengths to your purpose. By the way, some of us have had clarity around our purpose or thought we did for years, but the pandemic has certainly made it
changed that.
Don't want to name names.
Yeah. And it's okay. And that's why I think that's why it's important for companies to revisit their purpose right now. What was our point number one? Revisit your purpose. Is it meeting this human need in today's workforce? And then look at your purpose. Is it meeting where you want to be? And then I think making sure you're unifying your purpose, your brand, and your culture together and having those metrics around that, and then using that accountability to drive progress. So tying all that business performance and the culture performance to outcomes as leaders. I think that's important, because otherwise you'll just say, yeah, we had a party, we had some balloons. No, that is not culture.
That's not enough.
Yeah. It's like, it's a daily conversation. I think H, I love what you said at the beginning. You said it's there all the time, right? Culture is there. It's how you lead it in a purpose-driven way that makes it dynamic and makes it powerful. And so I think we are getting ready to be in our last few minutes here, but I do want to just talk about, just in this last few minutes, about how important it is for managers to lead culture in their areas, even if their leader is not doing that or other people in their group are not doing that. And this gets into a topic that we're going to be going into in a couple of weeks about leader as coach, but it is the responsibility of the leader to take responsibility within, whether they have 2 people or 5 people or 3,500 people, whatever they've got, it's their role to own the culture. I'd love for us to talk about that for just a few minutes while we've got a few minutes left as leader, as coach, and what does that mindset look like? And how do we encourage leaders to own it and not wait for somebody else to do it? Any thoughts on that? I mean, I see a lot in the workplace. I have seen managers that say, well, I'm just waiting for my leader to tell me, and I'm like, no, this is your responsibility. This is your responsibility to bring it to your team. Even if you've got a team that's on the front lines, whatever that looks like, that you're bringing it to them and you're bringing them, making them feel a part of the culture, and they see you as a leader of the culture. So
I think
go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
No, it's okay.
So I think it goes back to that bottom-up approach, right? That if you want, if you're uncertain how to drive, or if your leadership isn't giving you the tools and the direction to help build out the culture, I think it's the bottom up of helping your employees understand what are their strengths, what are their purpose, what do we want our purpose to be in our team, and then talk through, have the discussion, right? That facilitate that discussion of how does this help the company or the bigger group that we belong to fulfill the purpose. And I think the other thing, and we talk about this when we do purpose work, right, is your purpose should be brought more than just about what you get. And I think that's a conversation when you're a leader, is to talk about your employees, each individual purpose at work, by the way, and say, how does that purpose help our customers, help our stakeholders? What does that look like? What do you do for them? How does that come to life? What do you want to be known for from this team, from the stakeholders that you engage with? So, which is a similar exercise you do at the organizational level, but you can do that at the individual level to help people find meaning. I think the real challenge for leaders, especially if they don't get the tools, is how do I connect my team, my individuals that work for me's purpose and give them meaning to the organization. If you can crack that nut, you're golden.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that was that piece of just making sure that that everything unifies together, so that each time we're talking about purpose within our group, we're pointing up to, and here's the mission, and here's why, and here's how we're impacting customers. Micah, did you have another thought before we close?
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing that comes to mind for me is that I think it would be hard to deny that culture influences performance, that we can't get the most out of our people in a culture that doesn't facilitate that. And if you think about performance, leaders at every level know that they're responsible for performance of their team, and they take responsibility, accountability, and control over that because they directly influence the performance of their team. So if you think about that from the perspective of culture, what leader would want to relinquish their influence on the culture of their team to the organization as a whole? It's kind of, that is a little bit of a cop-out to expect that your organization as a whole is going to have a strong enough culture without your help to let them be responsible for how that influences your team. That's relinquishing influence that I don't think any leader would want to do on the performance of their team or the ability of their team to perform at the highest level. So I see it as an opportunity. And I think that if leaders are waiting for culture to be trickled down to their teams, they're missing a huge opportunity to have more influence on the success and performance of their team by not taking that responsibility on themselves. It's a missed opportunity. Why wouldn't you lean into that? I think I'll just, like, one last comment. I think the reason it is hard for leaders to lean into that and own it and accept it themselves is that it is an intangible culture, is an intangible part of your organization in almost every way. And I think that we joked earlier about the fact that sometimes companies throw perks at employees, hoping that like, this is the culture we want, but having a barista and having paternity leave and having, like all of the perks that they throw at employees, hoping that that's our culture. I think that's an indicator of the fact that culture is hard. It's not easy to just throw perks at people and hope that they're engaged. You do have to put a lot of thought and work into creating a culture where people can succeed. So I'll give that as kind of a way to accept or to validate that managers that are trying to build a culture and having a hard time with it, you're not alone. It is a hard thing that people are still trying to figure out.
Yeah, and it's definitely a strategic priority, and it's definitely something that can't be delegated or compartmentalized anymore. Everybody has to own it, and I think I've seen that happen before. So I think as we get ready to close down, I think that there's some great points that were brought up today. I loved the reference to Daniel Pink's book Drive. I think that was great, about the autonomy and the meaning and community and how important that is. So thank y'all for bringing that up. And then also just making sure that each person has their own individual purpose and knows that and uses their strengths. If they don't know their Clifton strengths, to reach out to one of us will help, and then help identify what their purpose is in life so that they can find that heart calling opportunity within their company, or be able to articulate that to their leader as they're looking at opportunities for growth. And then I think for leaders, being able to own it and grow it and be that coach, drive that accountability, and making sure that they're always tying in the culture to the purpose and the brand and the metrics for the company. So we could go on and on. I think today we're a little over, but I just want to thank you guys for a great conversation today. And then want to remind you that I think it's December 13th. We're going to be back, and Mike is going to be leading us in a conversation of leader as coach. So as we talk about the importance of the leader as coach and that role within the organization. So please join us for that. And we thank you guys for joining us today.
Thanks.
Yeah, it was a pleasure.
Thank you guys.
See you guys. Have a good one.
Yeah.
Okay. Bye.